They called him Diablo, the millionaire's untouchable horse, wild, dangerous, and worth a fortune because no one could ride him. Men tried and failed. The world believed he was a demon trapped in steel. But then, a young girl arrived with nothing but her father's old journal and a heart that refused to give up. What happened next was something no one expected. A bond that would change them both forever. The train thundered across the valleys, cutting through landscapes that shifted like the pages of an old family album. Vermont had already slipped behind her, its crimson maples dissolving into memory. Claire pressed her forehead to the glass, watching the horizon widen with every mile, the scenery flattening into endless plains. She held a leather-bound journal against her chest, her father's journal, the only piece of him she had left since the accident that had taken him. The rhythmic sway of the train reminded her of his voice when he used to read aloud by the fire, slow and patient, like he was letting the words breathe. Now that voice was gone, and all she had were sentences fading into ink. She turned a page, running her fingertip along the handwriting, half afraid the letters might smudge away if she lingered too long. She was 16, traveling alone toward a place she had never seen, a sprawling Texas ranch owned by a man she had only heard about in passing, the Blackwood name spoken in equal parts awe and contempt. Henry Blackwood, the oil millionaire who had built empires out of dirt and steel, whose power stretched farther than the fences on his land. Her mother had insisted on sending her here for the summer, hoping distance might heal what grief had hollowed out. But Claire suspected her mother simply wanted her gone, out of sight in a new household that no longer felt like home. Outside, the sky opened wider than any she had known. The sun here did not hide behind mountains. It poured down like a punishment, illuminating every flaw and shadow. Fields of wildflowers bowed under the wind, and somewhere in that vastness ran the creature she had heard whispers about, a black mustang no one could touch. They called him Diablo. The name alone carried weight, like a curse meant to keep people away. Claire closed her eyes, and the sound of hooves filled her memory. She could still see it, her father riding hard through a meadow, the leather reins slack in his hands, his laughter echoing across the hill. Then, in a flash, the horse stumbled, her father thrown forward, silence swallowing the air. She had been 8 years old. That image never left her, the twisted body, the stillness that came too quickly. Horses had both taken her father and kept him alive in memory. And now, for reasons she could not name, she was being pulled back toward them. The train slowed as it neared the station. Dust rose in the golden light, settling over wooden platforms and weathered signs. The air smelled different here. Dry, tinged with mesquite and sunburnt earth. Claire gripped her small suitcase and stepped down, her boots crunching on gravel. A sleek black car waited by the road, its chrome glinting like a blade. A driver in a pressed hat tipped his head. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice was polite but distant. "Yes." Her own voice was thinner than she meant it to be. "This way, ma'am. Mr. Blackwood is expecting you." She slid into the leather seat, the journal still pressed to her chest, her pulse quickening as the car rolled away. The landscape outside became larger, harsher. Long stretches of fence cut through the plains, dotted with cattle, while hawks circled overhead. The driver said nothing, and the silence grew heavy. Claire's palms were damp, but she refused to let the driver see her nerves. At last, the gates appeared, wrought iron twisted into the shape of stallions, tall and unyielding. They swung open without a sound, revealing the Blackwood Ranch. The house loomed in the distance, a mansion carved of stone and timber, its windows reflecting the setting sun like watchful eyes. Beside the main house stretched endless pastures, barns, and corrals. But it wasn't the grandeur that caught Claire's breath. It was the sound. A harsh, metallic clang echoed from a distant enclosure, followed by a furious whinny that seemed to tear the sky in two. She turned her head sharply and saw him, a dark figure thrashing inside a reinforced pen, kicking against steel bars, muscles rippling with raw defiance. Diablo. The driver muttered under his breath, almost like a prayer. Claire pressed her hand to the window, unable to look away. The horse's mane whipped like fire in the wind, and his eyes, even from a distance, burned with something more than rage. There was hurt in them, deep and unrelenting, like an open wound that refused to heal. For the first time since her father's death, Claire felt her fear and longing collide. Her chest tightened, but she did not look away. The car rolled to a stop at the front steps. The heavy doors opened, and Henry Blackwood himself emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight. His presence filled the air before he even spoke. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch," he said, his voice steady, edged with command. "You'll find things are different here." Claire clutched the journal tighter. She didn't answer, only glanced once more toward the pen where Diablo reared against his prison, the dust rising like smoke around him. And in that silent exchange between a frightened girl and a furious horse, the story had already begun. The front doors of the house swung wide, and Claire stepped into a hall that smelled faintly of leather and old oak. The air inside was cooler than the heavy Texas dusk, but it wasn't welcoming. Oil paintings of horses lined the walls, captured in mid-stride, all motion and power frozen into frames. A chandelier cast light over polished floors that reflected her every movement. For all its grandeur, the house felt hollow, like it had been built more for display than for living. Henry Blackwood walked ahead without slowing, his boots striking the floor with a steady rhythm. "This ranch is not for the faint of heart," he said, his voice echoing off stone. "It was built on discipline, not sentiment. Remember that." Claire's eyes followed the sweep of staircases and the heavy curtains pulled tight against the windows. She could not see the sky anymore, nor the pastures stretching beyond. A weight settled over her chest, as if she had stepped into a place where freedom had no entry. She thought of the horse in the pen, his wild cry still ringing in her ears. Dinner was laid out in the dining room, though only 2 chairs were set at the long table. The silverware gleamed, untouched. Henry sat at the head, leaving the seat closest to him for her. Servants brought dishes one after another, but the silence was thicker than the steam rising from the plates. "You'll have work here," Henry said finally, as he cut into his steak. "Not play. I don't take in guests." His eyes flicked to her, gray and piercing. "You'll earn your place. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Claire whispered, though her appetite had vanished. He studied her as though she were another investment, another risk to calculate. "You're here because your mother believes a summer on a ranch might straighten your spirit. I don't believe in soft cures. Discipline, structure, responsibility. That's what makes a person useful." Claire's fork trembled in her hand. The words felt like shackles, yet she didn't protest. She thought of her father, how he had taught her differently, that kindness was not weakness, but strength. Here, in this house of iron and stone, such a belief seemed almost dangerous. After the meal, Henry rose and gestured for her to follow. They stepped outside into the twilight, where lanterns flickered along the paths. The ranch stretched wide under a fading purple sky. In the distance, the steel enclosure loomed. The sound of pounding hooves carried through the air, sharp and relentless. "There he is," Henry said, nodding toward the pen. "Diablo, wildest Mustang I've ever laid eyes on. Worth a fortune if he could be broken. But he can't. He's pure defiance. A monster." Claire's breath caught as she saw him again, his silhouette surging against the bars, every muscle straining like a storm trapped in flesh. The horse slammed his body against the gate, sparks flying where metal scraped metal. Workers nearby flinched, keeping their distance. Henry's lips curved into something between pride and disdain. "I made a wager. $1 million says no man alive can ride him, and I'll win, because no one will." The words struck Claire like a stone to the chest. She glanced at Diablo, at the fury and despair in his movements, and something inside her tightened. He wasn't just fighting people. He was fighting against the cage itself, against being owned. Henry turned toward her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You'll stay clear of him. He's not a pet, not a companion. He's danger, pure and simple. Remember that." But as Henry strode back toward the house, Claire lingered. The night air was thick with dust and heat, cicadas humming their restless song. Diablo stood at the far end of the pen now, his chest heaving, sweat gleaming along his dark coat. For a moment he lifted his head and looked at her. The gaze rooted her to the ground. His eyes were not just wild. They were wounded. It was the same look she had seen in her own reflection, late at night, when grief returned to suffocate her. Not rage, not madness. Pain. Claire pressed her fingers to the cool iron fence, though she dared not move closer. The horse snorted, pawing at the dirt, but he did not charge. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're not a monster." The night answered with silence, broken only by Diablo's restless breathing. Later, in the small guest room assigned to her, Claire sat by the window with her father's journal open on her lap. The pages smelled faintly of smoke and earth. She read his words again and again. "The measure of trust isn't in ropes or reins. It's in whether the horse chooses to stay when it doesn't have to." Her eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Beyond the glass, she could still hear Diablo's hooves hammering into the night, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Sleep would not come. Something had already begun inside her, an awakening she could neither explain nor deny. And as the moon climbed higher over the Texas plains, Claire knew one truth with startling clarity. The story of her summer at Blackwood Ranch would not be about discipline or wagers. It would be about the fire in that horse's eyes, and whether she could stand close enough without being burned. The following evening, the ranch transformed into a stage. Carriages and polished cars lined the gravel drive, their headlights sweeping across the stone facade of the Blackwood mansion. Lanterns glowed from the verandas, and inside the air pulsed with the low hum of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of crystal glasses. The scent of cigars mixed with roasted meats, drifting through wide hallways, where guests in tailored suits and silk gowns moved like pieces in a chess game. Claire stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands folded tightly before her. She wore a simple dress Eleanor had left for her, pale blue cotton against the extravagance of sequins and velvet that shimmered around her. She felt invisible, and perhaps she wanted it that way. But when her eyes caught Henry's figure at the center of the room, she knew that even here, among people who respected or feared him, his presence alone commanded silence. Henry raised a glass of bourbon, his silver hair glinting under the chandelier. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting easily through the chatter, "tonight is a reminder of what this land demands: strength, will, and the refusal to be broken." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces before him. And of course, a little entertainment never hurt anyone. A ripple of laughter spread. Claire's stomach tightened. Henry gestured toward the windows. Outside, floodlights illuminated the steel enclosure where Diablo paced like a shadow incarnate. Gasps and murmurs rose from the guests who caught sight of him through the glass. "That," Henry continued, "is Diablo. Wildest Mustang west of the Pecos. Strong as a storm, mean as sin. I brought him from the desert myself, and I tell you now, no man can ride him." Claire's breath hitched. The way he said it, as if Diablo were not a living creature but a weapon, a spectacle, cut her like a blade. Henry smiled, the kind of smile that was both invitation and challenge. "So here is my wager. $1 million to the man, or woman if she dares, who can mount him, ride him, and stay seated for more than 8 seconds. That's all. 8 seconds. Simple, isn't it?" The room erupted in disbelief. Some laughed, others shook their heads. Bets were shouted, hands clasped in new deals struck over polished wood. The air thickened with excitement. A wealthy oil partner boasted he'd try, a retired rodeo star joked about needing the money, and a group of younger men nudged one another, their bravado louder than their sense. Claire pressed back against the wall, her heart racing. She had never seen such hunger in people's eyes. Not for the horse, but for the spectacle of breaking him. Diablo's cries pierced the glass as he slammed his hooves against steel, and for a moment, the grandeur of the party faltered. His rage drowned out the laughter. She slipped toward the veranda, stepping into the cooler night air. From here, she could see him more clearly under the harsh white lights. His coat glistened with sweat, his muscles quivering with fury. Yet his eyes, those same eyes she had seen in the dusk, found her again, even across the distance. They seemed to ask a question she could not name. A voice startled her. "You shouldn't be out here." She turned. It was Eleanor, dressed in emerald silk, her auburn hair pinned high. "My father doesn't like anyone getting too close." Her tone was clipped but not unkind. "I wasn't going to—" Claire trailed off, realizing she didn't have an excuse. Eleanor studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "He's dangerous, but not in the way they say. He doesn't hate people. He just hates the cage." The words lingered between them like smoke. Claire's chest tightened. She wanted to ask more, but inside the crowd roared with renewed laughter as another toast rang out. Eleanor's face hardened. "Come back in. Don't give them reason to notice you." Later, as the evening wound down, Claire found herself wandering again, pulled by the sound of hooves. Guests were departing, their chauffeurs waiting with doors open, their laughter echoing into the night. Henry's voice boomed from the doorway. "Remember the wager, folks. Spread the word. There's a fortune waiting for the fool who thinks he's braver than the devil himself." Diablo's silhouette shifted in the pen, his breath visible in the cool air. Claire lingered until the yard was empty, until even the servants had gone. She stepped closer to the fence, the floodlights casting long shadows across her face. "You don't deserve this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't deserve to be their game." The horse flared his nostrils, stamping the ground, but he didn't charge. For one suspended heartbeat, the night felt different, quieter, softer. Claire pressed her hand against the cold steel bars, her pulse quickening. Inside her father's journal lay words she hadn't yet read, words about patience, about trust. She thought of them now, her voice barely audible. "I see you," she said. "I don't know how, but I see you." The floodlights flickered, and Diablo turned his head, as though the moment had passed. Claire backed away, her legs unsteady, her heart loud in her chest. Behind her, a door slammed. She flinched. Henry stood on the steps, a shadow cut against the lantern glow. "Stay away from him," he warned, his voice low and sharp. "He's not yours to save." Claire clutched the journal tighter. She didn't reply, but as she walked back inside, her thoughts burned with a certainty that frightened her. She would not stay away. The night after the wager lingered in Claire's bones like a fever she couldn't shake. Even tucked beneath the quilt in her narrow guest bed, she could hear Diablo's restless hooves striking metal, the sound carrying across the fields like thunder that refused to end. She barely slept. At dawn, she rose and slipped out before the household stirred, clutching her father's journal as if it might shield her. Mist hovered low over the ranch, softening the edges of the barns and fences. The air smelled of hay and damp earth, a momentary gentleness before the sun burned it all away. Claire followed the sound she already knew by heart, the rhythm of an animal trapped in fury. When she reached the enclosure, Diablo was circling, head tossing, flanks quivering with sweat despite the cool morning. For the first time, she dared to step closer. The steel bars were streaked with dust and dents, where he had thrown himself against them. His breath fogged the air, every exhale like a warning, but when he turned, their eyes locked, and she froze. His gaze was fire and sorrow fused into one, amber dark and bottomless. Claire felt stripped bare beneath it, as if every secret she carried, the loneliness, the loss of her father, the ache of never belonging, was suddenly visible to him. She raised her hand slowly, stopping short of the bars, afraid of breaking whatever fragile thread tied them in that moment. From behind, a voice startled her. "You've got more courage than sense, girl." She turned quickly. A man leaned against the fence post, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat pulled low. His eyes were kind but sharp, amused yet cautious. She recognized him from the night before, standing near the stables when the guests had gathered. "Who are you?" she asked. "Sam Torres," he said, tipping his hat. "Been working horses here since I was 12. And I'm telling you that one ain't for the likes of you." Claire bristled. "I wasn't trying to touch him." Sam's gaze softened, but his voice remained steady. "Doesn't matter. That horse doesn't care if you mean well. He's got scars deeper than the eye can see. Try to force him, he'll tear you apart." Claire lowered her hand, but didn't look away from Diablo. What if he doesn't need force? What if he just needs someone to stay? Sam studied her for a long moment, as though weighing the weight of her words. Finally, he chuckled, though there was no mockery in it. "Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. But around here, fairy tales end in the dirt." They stood in silence, the only sound Diablo's heavy breathing and the occasional strike of his hoof. The horse pawed at the ground, eyes flicking between them. Claire could swear there was curiosity there, buried beneath the rage. Later that day, While Henry oversaw ranch hands repairing a fence line, Claire returned alone. She sat cross-legged in the grass just beyond the enclosure, opening her father's journal. Her voice was quiet as she read aloud a passage. "The first bond between horse and rider is not forged by rope or rein. It begins with patience, the stillness of one willing to wait." Her voice trembled but steadied as she continued. Diablo kept pacing at first, snorting and tossing his head. But over time, his circle slowed. His ears twitched toward her, his steps quieter. When she paused, he paused too, as if unwilling to let the sound go. Claire's heart swelled. It wasn't victory, not even close. But it was something. She whispered, "I'll wait as long as it takes." The sun climbed, burning off the mist, and with it came the reality of the ranch. Shouts from the workers echoed, the clang of tools against metal, the bark of orders from Henry. Life on the Blackwood Ranch was a machine, every cog expected to move without hesitation. Claire knew she didn't belong in its rhythm, yet here she was, anchored by the pull of a creature no one could tame. That evening, as lanterns lit the yard, Henry confronted her. He had heard from a worker that she'd been loitering near the pen. His face hardened, carved deep with lines of authority. "I told you once, girl. Stay away from that animal," he said. "You don't know what you're meddling with." Claire clutched the journal tighter against her chest. "He's not just an animal. He's hurting." Henry's laugh was sharp, cutting. "Pain makes him valuable. A horse without fight is just meat on hooves. That one's worth millions because no one can ride him. Don't let your childish fancies interfere with business." His words stung, but she stood her ground, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. "He's more than a bet." Henry stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "You think you see something no one else does? You're a girl who doesn't know the first thing about survival. This world doesn't reward kindness. It crushes it." Claire swallowed hard, but she didn't back away. When he finally turned and strode into the house, the night felt colder, heavier. Yet even then, in the distance, she could hear Diablo's low whinny, steady and relentless, like a drum keeping her heart from faltering. She returned to her room and wrote a single line in her father's journal, beneath his old words, "I will not give up on him." And for the first time since she had arrived, the silence inside her didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like resolve. The next morning broke hotter than the last, the Texas sun already fierce as it climbed the horizon. Claire stood near the barn, watching the workers move with brisk efficiency, their shouts carrying across the fields. Dust rose beneath hooves as horses were led out for exercise, their sleek coats glistening. Amid the chaos, Sam Torres worked with a calm steadiness that set him apart. He moved like someone born into this land, his body attuned to the rhythm of horses. When one mare balked at the rope, Sam didn't yank or shout. He waited, murmuring something in Spanish, his hand loose on the line. Slowly, the mare's trembling eased. She followed, tentative at first, then willingly. It was as though Sam spoke a language Claire didn't yet know, not of words, but of patience. She lingered by the fence, unwilling to interrupt. Eventually, Sam noticed her. He gave a short nod, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "Back again, huh?" Claire tightened her grip on her father's journal. "I couldn't sleep. The sound, he never stops." Sam's expression softened. "That's Diablo for you. He fights the cage every hour, every day. Some folks call it madness. I call it memory. He knows what freedom tastes like, and he'll kill himself before he forgets." The words settled heavy in her chest. She thought of her father's journal entries, the way he wrote of horses not as property, but as companions with souls. Looking at Sam, she sensed he understood something similar, though his eyes carried their own shadows. "Why do you stay here?" she asked quietly. Sam leaned against the post, wiping sweat from his brow with a rag. "Because once I thought I was going to be somebody. Rodeo champion. Gold buckles, flashing lights. But I froze when it mattered, got thrown hard, and the crowd never forgets failure. This ranch, it's work. Honest enough, even under Blackwood's thumb. But I don't fool myself. I'm not the man they clap for anymore." Claire heard the bitterness beneath his calm tone. For the first time since arriving, she felt less alone in carrying the weight of disappointment. "Maybe you're still the man who listens," she offered, surprising herself with the honesty. He looked at her, and a faint smile tugged at his lips. "You've got words sharper than you think, Claire Whitmore." The sound of hooves cracked through their quiet. From the far pen, Diablo reared, slamming his weight into the bars. The workers cursed, keeping their distance. Claire turned sharply, heart in her throat. Sam laid a hand on her arm. "Easy. He's not calling for you. He's fighting himself." But Claire wasn't sure. Something in that cry seemed directed outward, beyond rage. She stepped forward, pulling gently from Sam's touch. "I need to try again." Sam frowned, but followed. They stopped near the fence where the Mustang churned the earth into dust. Claire crouched, lowering herself to the horse's eye level. The heat pressed on her shoulders, sweat sliding down her temple. But she kept her voice calm. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "Not today." Sam shook his head, muttering, "You're crazy." Yet he didn't drag her away. Instead, he leaned on the fence, watching. Minutes stretched. Diablo's nostrils flared, ears pinned, muscles taut. Then slowly, his pace slowed. His sides heaved. His gaze flicked toward Claire, sharp and uncertain. She held it, her own heartbeat a drum in her chest. For the briefest moment, his steps faltered. He did not approach, but he stopped circling. His ears twitched. Sam's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. Claire exhaled, relief flooding her limbs. It wasn't victory, but it was proof. Proof that patience could carve a path where force had failed. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "He's not hopeless," she said, her voice steady. Sam regarded her with a new measure of respect. "Don't let Blackwood hear you say that. He doesn't like hope when it threatens his pride." That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Claire sat again by her window, journal open. She wrote with a determination that surprised her. Today he looked at me and didn't see fear. Today he listened. Across the yard, Diablo whinnied, a sound that cut through the heavy silence. Claire leaned her forehead against the glass, whispering into the dusk, "We're both still here." And for the first time since her father's death, she felt the faintest flicker of belonging. Not with the house, nor the man who ruled it, but with the horse who refused to surrender. The days on Blackwood Ranch unfolded with the rhythm of sun and dust. But for Claire, time was measured not by hours, but by the moments she spent beside the steel pen. Each dawn she slipped from her room with her father's journal in hand, settling herself on the grass outside the enclosure. Workers passed her with wary glances, muttering about foolishness, but no one stopped her. Perhaps they were curious to see how long a girl could last in the company of a beast no one dared approach. She didn't try to touch him. Not yet. Instead, she read. She let her voice mingle with the low hum of cicadas and the whisper of the wind over the plains. Sometimes she read from the journal, passages her father had scrawled in ink faded by time. Other times she read aloud from the old novels she found in the ranch's forgotten library. The words floated through the hot air, rising and falling like a lullaby only one listener was meant to hear. At first, Diablo responded with fury, circling and snorting, throwing his weight against the bars. But gradually, his rage seemed to burn itself out under the weight of her stillness. By the fourth morning, he no longer charged when she arrived. By the fifth, he slowed his steps when her voice carried. On the sixth day, something changed. Claire lay back in the grass, her book open beside her, staring at the sky streaked with high clouds. She closed her eyes, listening to the rustle of wings overhead. She was almost drifting into sleep when she felt it, warmth brushing her cheek. Her eyes flew open, and there he was. Diablo stood near the bars, his head lowered, nostrils flaring. His breath, hot and damp, touched her skin like a question. Claire froze, afraid that even blinking might break the spell. Her heartbeat thundered. She whispered, "It's all right. I'm here." The Mustang snorted, tossing his head, but he didn't retreat. For a single suspended moment, he simply stood there, watching her, the fury dimmed in his eyes. Then, with a sudden shake of his mane, he wheeled away, pounding the ground until the dust swallowed him again. Claire sat up, trembling, her hands pressed against the earth as if to anchor herself. It wasn't triumph, it was grace, fleeting and fragile. But it was enough to make her believe she was no longer just a girl sitting outside a cage. She was someone being noticed. Later that evening, Sam found her by the fence. He carried a coil of rope slung over one shoulder, his shirt streaked with sweat. He studied her with an expression that was half exasperation, half admiration. "So it's true," he said. "He came to you." Claire hugged her knees, still replaying the moment in her mind. "Not to me, just near me." Sam squatted beside her, his eyes narrowing. "That's more than he's ever done for anyone else. You've got something, Claire. Don't waste it." She shook her head. "I don't even know what I'm doing. I just read and wait." "That's what he needs," Sam said. "Not a fight, just someone willing to wait." His tone was gentle, but beneath it lay a warning. "Careful, though. Blackwood won't like it. If he thinks you're softening that horse, he'll put an end to it." Claire looked toward the mansion, its windows glowing in the twilight. The thought of Henry's disapproval chilled her, but then she remembered the heat of Diablo's breath on her skin. That single second outweighed the fear. "I can't stop now," she murmured. Sam sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Stubborn as the Mustang, aren't you?" He stood, adjusting the rope on his shoulder. "All right then. If you're going to keep at this, you'd better learn more than reading. Tomorrow, meet me by the South Corral. I'll show you a thing or two about trust." That night, Claire wrote in her father's journal, "Today, I felt him breathe. For the first time since you left, I felt alive too." She left the lamp burning low, unwilling to extinguish the light. Outside her window, the plains stretched silent under the stars, but in the distance came the faintest sound, not the furious pounding of hooves, but a low, steady rumble, almost like a sigh. Claire pressed her hand to the glass, whispering into the night. "We're getting closer." The storm came without warning, rolling in from the horizon with the weight of memory. Dark clouds gathered over the plains, swallowing the late afternoon sun. Claire sat by the window of her small room, her father's journal open but unread. Each crack of thunder jolted her back to the image she had carried for years. Her father thrown from a horse, the ground rushing up, the silence afterward heavier than the sky itself. She pressed her palms against the pages, willing the memory to fade, but the storm outside pulled it closer. She had believed that watching Diablo breathe near her had given her strength. Yet now, under the roar of the sky, she felt that strength dissolve into fear. When the rain came, it came hard, pelting the ranch with sheets of water. Workers hurried to secure the barns, shouting over the downpour. Claire grabbed her boots and ran outside, her dress plastered against her skin in seconds. Her instinct wasn't to hide, it was to find him. Diablo. The steel pen was a chaos of mud and water. The Mustang reared and slammed against the bars, lightning carving his silhouette in white fire. His cry cut through the storm, raw and desperate. Claire stumbled closer, mud sucking at her boots. She reached the fence and clung to the bars, rain blinding her, hair whipping across her face. "It's all right," she shouted, though her voice was swallowed by thunder. "I'm here." But Diablo didn't calm. His terror fed her own, dragging her backward in time. She saw her father's body again, saw the panic of a horse that could not be stopped. The weight of grief and fear collided, and she crumpled to her knees in the mud. Strong hands caught her shoulders. Sam's voice broke through the storm. "Claire, you'll get yourself killed out here." He hauled her up, half dragging her toward shelter. She fought against him, shaking her head. "I can't leave him," she cried. Sam's face was grim beneath the brim of his soaked hat. "You can't save him by drowning with him. Come on." They stumbled into the barn, rain hammering the roof. Claire leaned against the wall, trembling, her breath ragged. Sam crouched in front of her, gripping her arms until her eyes met his. "What happened out there?" he demanded, softer now. Claire closed her eyes. The words tore from her throat. "My father, he died because of a horse. I was 8. I watched him fall. I watched him never get back up. And every time I see Diablo lose control, I see it again. I can't stop it." The confession ripped something open inside her, a wound she had kept buried. Sam's grip loosened, his expression shifting from frustration to something gentler. He removed his hat, rainwater dripping from its brim, and sat beside her on the hay-strewn floor. "You carry that alone too long. It eats you alive," he said quietly. "But you need to know this. Diablo isn't your father's horse. He's not the past. He's just himself. And maybe he's giving you the chance to face what you couldn't before." Claire hugged her knees, tears mixing with the rain on her face. The storm raged outside, but here, in the dim barn, the words settled like a fragile seed. She thought of Diablo's breath on her cheek, of that single moment of calm, and clung to it. Hours later, when the storm eased, Claire slipped back to the pen. The ground was slick, puddles reflecting the fractured moonlight. Diablo stood still now, drenched, his sides heaving. He didn't rage against the bars. He only watched her. Claire stepped closer, her boots sinking in mud. She whispered through the quiet, her voice raw but steady. "I'm not running anymore." The Mustang snorted, shaking his drenched mane. His eyes glowed in the moonlight, not with fury, but with a question, as if asking whether she truly meant the words. Claire gripped the journal tight against her chest, her father's memory heavy, but no longer suffocating. She breathed in the smell of wet earth and horse sweat, a smell that once would have shattered her. Now it steadied her. She turned away only when the workers began returning at dawn, their voices carrying across the damp yard. Back in her room, she wrote one line beneath the confession she had scrawled the night before. "Tonight I broke, but I did not run, and maybe that is the beginning." For the first time, the memory of her father's fall didn't end in silence. It ended with the sound of rain easing and the quiet presence of a Mustang who, like her, was still standing after the storm. The storm had left the ranch in shambles. Branches littered the yard, fences leaned under the weight of soaked earth, and puddles stretched like mirrors across the fields. Workers moved at dawn, hammering, repairing, cursing under their breath. Claire joined them quietly, hauling wood, fetching nails, anything to keep her hands busy. Yet even as she worked, her eyes strayed toward the pen. Diablo stood drenched but alive, his black coat gleaming beneath the rising sun, his breath steady. He had endured, and so had she. But not everyone on the ranch carried themselves with such quiet resilience. Eleanor Blackwood emerged from the house that morning in riding boots polished to a shine, her auburn hair pinned neatly. She watched the repairs from the veranda, her arms crossed, her posture stiff. When she spotted Claire, her gaze lingered a moment too long. Cool, assessing, tinged with something unspoken. Later, as Claire rested by the water pump, Eleanor approached. The sharp scent of perfume cut through the damp air. "You've been spending a lot of time near that horse," Eleanor said, her tone casual but edged. Claire wiped her hands on her skirt. "I suppose I have." Eleanor tilted her head, studying her. "You think you're the first? I've stood by that pen more nights than I can count. He never looked at me the way he looks at you." The admission startled Claire. She searched Eleanor's face and found, beneath the veneer of confidence, a flicker of hurt. "My father calls him a monster," Eleanor continued, her voice low. "But I see the same thing you do, that he's not angry for the sake of anger. He's angry because he's trapped. And in a way, I know what that feels like." Claire frowned. "Trapped?" Eleanor laughed softly, though it carried no joy. "You think this ranch is freedom? It's a gilded cage. My father built it with steel and pride, and I'm supposed to live in it, breathe in it, inherit it like a crown I never asked for. Everyone thinks being his daughter is fortune, but he doesn't see me. Not really. I'm just another piece of his empire." The words struck something in Claire. She thought of her own mother, distant and distracted, sending her here as if she were a problem to be solved. Different stories, perhaps, but the same ache. To belong and not be seen. "Why are you telling me this?" Claire asked quietly. Eleanor's gaze shifted to the horizon, where Diablo stood still, his mane rippling in the wind. "Because I think you understand him. And if you can reach him, maybe you can understand me too." She paused, her jaw tightening. "And maybe you'll succeed where I failed." Before Claire could reply, Henry's voice carried across the yard, commanding and sharp. "Eleanor!" He strode toward them, boots striking the wet ground. "Why are you wasting time gossiping with her? There's work to be done, and guests to impress. You think I raised you for idle chatter?" Eleanor's face hardened. The vulnerability shuttered in an instant. She turned away, her chin lifted, her voice crisp. "Of course, Father. Henry barely acknowledged Claire. Only cast her a cold glance before barking new orders at the workers. But as Eleanor walked past, her hand brushed against Claire's, a fleeting gesture, almost accidental. It carried the weight of something unsaid, a silent plea not to forget the moment of truth just shared. That evening, Claire found Eleanor in the stable, brushing down a chestnut mare. The air smelled of hay and leather, gentler than the open yard. Claire hesitated, then stepped inside. "You don't have to pretend with me," Claire said softly. Eleanor's hand stilled on the horse's flank. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, without looking up, she whispered, "I envy you. He looks at you, Diablo. He trusts you in a way I couldn't make him. I've tried for months. I brought him apples, sugar cubes, anything. He only ever turned away. Do you know what it's like, to try and fail under my father's gaze?" Claire swallowed, choosing her words carefully. "I don't think it's failure. Sometimes it isn't about us. Sometimes it's just timing." Eleanor finally turned, her eyes glistening though her voice remained steady. "Timing won't change my father. He'll never see me as anything but an extension of himself. But maybe you can show him he's wrong. That kindness isn't weakness." The mare nickered softly, nudging Eleanor's shoulder. She smiled faintly, stroking its neck. For that brief moment, she looked less like the heiress of an empire and more like a girl who had once dreamed of something different. When Claire returned to her room, she wrote in the journal, "Even the daughter of steel longs for freedom. Perhaps we are all just waiting for someone to open the gate." She closed the book, listening. Across the night, Diablo's low rumble carried again, steady and present. It no longer felt like defiance alone. It felt like endurance. And in Eleanor's words, Claire had discovered another truth. She was not the only soul here longing to be set free. The moon rose high over Blackwood Ranch, pale and watchful, its light spilling across the fields like milk poured over dark earth. Claire slipped from her room, the journal pressed against her chest, her bare feet light on the wooden stairs. She had grown used to silence here, but tonight it seemed deeper, heavier, as though the whole ranch held its breath. She moved toward the steel enclosure, guided by the sound she had learned to distinguish from all others. The restless shifting of hooves, the low rumble of breath caught between fury and exhaustion. Diablo was awake, pacing slowly, his dark coat shimmering beneath the silver glow. The floodlights had been switched off, leaving only the moon to sketch his form in shades of gray. Claire stopped just beyond the bars, her heart racing. She thought of Eleanor's words that morning, of envy wrapped in sorrow, of the girl who longed to be seen by her father. And she thought of her own father, his laugh, his fall, the silence that had followed. Two daughters from different worlds, bound by the same ache of being unseen. Perhaps that was why she found herself here again, daring more than she should. She lowered herself to the ground, cross-legged in the damp grass, and opened the journal. But instead of reading, she spoke from her own heart. "I don't know if you hear me. Maybe I'm just talking to myself. But when I look at you, I see more than anger. I see someone who remembers what it feels like to be free. And I think I'm the same." The Mustang stopped circling, his head lifted, ears pricked forward. Claire's breath caught. She rose slowly, careful not to startle him. She pressed her palm against the cold iron, willing the distance to close. And then, in a moment that felt like stepping across an invisible threshold, Diablo came closer, Step by step, deliberate, his muscles coiled but his eyes steady. Claire's throat tightened as he halted just beyond her reach. His nostrils flared, drawing in her scent, his breath washing over her hand. Her fingers trembled, but she did not move them away. She whispered, "It's all right." For a single heartbeat, the impossible seemed within reach. Diablo lowered his head, his muzzle brushing the bars. Claire pressed her palm flat, her skin tingling with the warmth of him. It was not a touch in the truest sense. Steel still separated them, but it was closer than she had ever dared hope. And then it shattered. A shout rang across the yard. "Girl, what the hell are you doing?" Claire jerked back, her heart leaping. Henry strode from the shadows, lantern in hand, his face carved with fury. The sudden intrusion spooked Diablo, who reared with a scream, crashing against the bars so violently the ground shook. Sparks flew where hoof struck steel. Claire stumbled backward, mud slick beneath her boots. Henry seized her arm, his grip iron. "I warned you," he hissed. "Do you want to die like your father?" The words sliced through her like a blade. She froze, her breath gone, her father's image flashing sharp and brutal in her mind. Henry dragged her away from the pen, his voice low but deadly. "That horse is a demon. You don't save demons, you break them. And if you can't, you put them down." Claire's chest burned, her fear tangled with rage. "You're wrong," she said, her voice barely audible. "He's not a demon." Henry's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening before he shoved her back. "Stay away, or I'll make sure you regret it." He stalked off, the lantern's glow retreating into the night. Diablo still raged in the pen, slamming and screaming, his eyes wild. Claire pressed her back to the fence, her whole body trembling. For a long time, she couldn't move. The shadows pressed close, heavy with Henry's words, heavy with the memory of her father's fall. But beneath it all, she clung to the moment just before. The breath, the closeness, the almost touch. When she finally found her strength, she whispered into the dark, her voice shaking but resolute. "You're not a demon. You're not." Back in her room, she scrawled in the journal with unsteady hands. "Tonight I touched the edge of his trust, and I touched the edge of my own fear. Both nearly broke, but neither did." She set down the pen, her pulse still racing. Beyond the window, the moon dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. Somewhere in the darkness, Diablo stood, fierce and unbroken, and for the first time, Claire believed she might stand with him in that darkness, unbroken too. The ranch simmered under the weight of midsummer heat. The air was so thick it clung to the skin, heavy with the smell of dust and sweat. Claire wiped her brow as she hauled buckets to the stables, her arms aching, her muscles beginning to learn the rhythm of hard work. But it wasn't the labor that unsettled her. It was the silence around Diablo's pen, the watchful eyes of the workers who seemed to linger whenever she passed. Word had spread. Someone had seen her near him at night. Whispers grew in the mess hall, mutters of foolishness, wagers among the hands about how long before she was thrown, or worse. The rumors seemed to feed Henry's pride. Claire caught him speaking with a group of men in pressed shirts, their faces slick with sweat and bourbon, their laughter carrying like gunshots across the yard. "She's a stubborn one," Henry said, his voice low but sharp. "If she wants to test herself against the beast, so be it. We'll let the whole damn county watch." Claire's stomach twisted. She ducked behind a stack of hay bales, her breath shallow. He was planning something. Not just for Diablo, for her. Later, in the shade of the South Corral, Sam found her. He was repairing a saddle, the leather creaking under his hands, his expression grim. "You've heard it, haven't you?" She nodded. "He's going to make me ride him." Sam set the saddle down, his eyes dark with worry. "Blackwood's been bragging. Said he'll host a gathering next week. Bring in rodeo men, reporters, the whole show. He wants proof his bet stands, and he's using you as part of the spectacle. If you try and fail in front of them..." His voice trailed off, but Claire understood. If she failed, Diablo would be marked not just as dangerous but worthless, and she herself would be humiliated, another pawn in Henry's game. "I won't let him break me," she said, though her voice shook. Sam leaned forward, his tone urgent. "This isn't about pride, Claire. You have to decide what you want. If you push too soon, you'll lose him, and maybe yourself." She swallowed hard, gripping her father's journal. "Then help me. Show me what I don't know." So he did. That evening, beneath the bruised sky of sunset, Sam led her to the training ring with a mare gentle enough for teaching. He showed her how to read the flick of an ear, the shift of weight, the difference between fear and defiance. "Horses speak in silence," he said. "It's us who shout too loud to hear them." Claire listened, practiced, stumbled, and tried again. Each small success felt like a thread weaving her closer, not just to Diablo, but to herself. By the time the stars prickled the sky, sweat plastered her hair to her temples, but her spirit glowed with a fragile determination. When she returned to her room, Eleanor was waiting by the door, arms folded. "You think you're ready for what he's planning?" she asked quietly. Claire hesitated. "I don't know, but I can't turn away now." Eleanor's gaze softened, a rare crack in her armor. "Then don't let him own your story. If you go into that pen, do it because you choose to, not because he commands it." The words settled into Claire's heart like stones in a river, shaping the current of her resolve. She spent that night reading her father's journal by lamplight, tracing the loops of his handwriting. "Trust is a storm. It will shake you, test you, strip you bare. But if you stand through it, what remains will be unbreakable." The next morning, Claire returned to Diablo. The sun burned hot, but she carried herself with quiet calm. She didn't read, didn't speak. She only sat in the grass, breathing slowly, matching the rise and fall of his chest. Hours passed, sweat soaking her shirt, dust clinging to her skin. Workers passed by, shaking their heads, but she didn't move. At last, Diablo stopped pacing. He stood still, ears pricked, eyes locked on her. The silence between them stretched, fragile as glass. And then, with a snort, he lowered his head, his muzzle brushing the grass near her side of the bars. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't surrender. But it was something rare. Acknowledgement. Claire's throat tightened. She whispered, "I'll stand through the storm with you." And though thunderclouds hadn't yet gathered on the horizon, she felt the weight of them already in the air. The morning of the exhibition dawned too bright, the sky an unbroken sheet of blue that made the heat shimmer before noon. Carriages and polished trucks lined the drive once again, the ranch transformed into a stage much like the night of the wager. But this time, there was no bourbon-soaked laughter spilling from the house. The guests had come for one thing alone: to see Diablo broken, or to see him destroy another who dared to try. Claire stood near the edge of the corral, her stomach twisted into knots. Dust already hung heavy in the air from the workers' preparations. Extra fencing, ropes coiled, even a stretcher tucked discreetly near the barn. Every precaution carried the same message. They expected blood. Henry Blackwood strode at the center of it all, immaculate in a tailored vest despite the heat, his voice booming over the gathering crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you'll witness proof of my wager. No man alive can ride Diablo. But for the sake of demonstration, we'll give you a show." The crowd roared approval. Some clapped, some jeered. Claire's breath caught when Henry's gaze slid to her. He gestured, and the crowd parted, all eyes turning. "You," he said, "you wanted to prove he was more than rage. Here is your chance. Mount him, and let's see if your kindness holds in the saddle." Gasps rippled, whispers darting like snakes through grass. Claire's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She glanced toward Sam, who stood grim-faced near the fence. His eyes pleaded with her to refuse. Eleanor was there too, stiff beside her father, her fists clenched at her sides. Claire shook her head. "I'm not ready." Her voice was barely audible, but Henry heard. "Then you'll never be ready," he barked. "The world doesn't wait for little girls to find their courage." The words cut deep, but the jeers from the crowd cut deeper. "She's afraid," someone shouted. "Bring out a real rider." The workers wrestled Diablo into the smaller chute, ropes taut, his screams slicing the air. The sight of him, wild-eyed, foam lathering his neck, tore Claire open. She could see nothing but her father's final moments, the chaos of hooves and the silence after. Somehow, she found herself moving forward, driven not by courage, but by the inability to watch him suffer alone. The chute gate rattled as Diablo struck against it, his fury reverberating through the boards. Henry's smirk was cruel, confident. "Climb on," he ordered. Claire's hands trembled as she gripped the rail. She whispered to herself, "I'll stand through the storm." She swung her leg over, landing clumsily on Diablo's back. The crowd erupted, the sound deafening. For one heartbeat, everything stilled. She felt the heat of his body beneath her, the tremor of raw power, the scent of sweat and dust. And then the gate flew open. Diablo exploded into motion, twisting, leaping, his body a storm of violence. Claire clung desperately, her vision jerking, the world a blur of sawn dirt. The screams of the crowd melted into nothing. There was only the thunder of hooves, the jolt of each violent buck. "Hold on!" Sam's voice rang out, but it was swallowed by the chaos. Claire lasted seconds, maybe less. Her grip slipped, the world spun, and she crashed into the dust with a force that drove the breath from her lungs. Pain seared through her side. The crowd gasped, half in horror, half in delight. Diablo reared, screaming, ropes snapping taut as men scrambled to regain control. Claire lay there, stunned, the sky whirling above her. Then, slowly, she rolled to her knees, coughing, tears stinging her eyes. She could feel the weight of every gaze, pity, scorn, amusement. And through it all, Henry's voice cut like a blade. "Pathetic," he spat. "You see? No one can ride him. Least of all a foolish girl with dreams in her head, and words crushed her more than the fall. She staggered to her feet, her body aching, and stumbled toward the fence. Sam caught her arm, steadying her, his face pale with fury. Eleanor turned away, unable to watch. Diablo was dragged back into the pen, his eyes rolling white, his screams hoarse. For an instant, his gaze found Claire through the chaos. It wasn't rage she saw there. It was betrayal. Her chest caved in. She whispered, broken, "I'm sorry." The workers hauled Diablo into the steel enclosure, slamming the gate shut. The dust settled, the crowd's murmur fading into background noise. Claire pressed her forehead against the wooden rail, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't contain. She had wanted to prove him free of demons. Instead, she had given Henry exactly what he wanted, a spectacle of failure. That night, she didn't return to the pen. She locked herself in her room, journal open but blank. The words wouldn't come. For the first time since she'd arrived, she thought of leaving. Of packing her small suitcase, catching a train north, escaping before Henry crushed her completely. But in the silence of her despair, she remembered one thing: the look in Diablo's eyes, that fleeting instant before the gate burst open. It hadn't been hatred. It had been fear. And she realized then that she hadn't only failed herself, she had failed him. She closed the journal, her decision unfinished, but heavy. Outside, the ranch lay silent, but the echo of Diablo's scream still rattled through the night like thunder that refused to fade. Claire packed in silence. The small suitcase lay open on the bed, its worn leather sides gaping like an accusation. She folded her few clothes with mechanical hands, her body still sore from the fall. Each movement ached, but not as much as the memory of the crowd's laughter or Henry's voice spitting the word pathetic. The sound haunted her, louder than the crack of bones, sharper than the dust choking her lungs. She shoved her father's journal into the case, then hesitated. The journal had been her anchor, her voice in the silence. But now, even its words felt hollow. She wanted to believe she was meant to stay here, meant to reach the horse in the steel pen. But every path forward seemed blocked by Henry's power and her own fear. The house was quiet at dawn. She crept down the hall, suitcase in hand, her heart thudding with guilt. Eleanor's door stood slightly ajar, golden light spilling into the corridor. Claire paused, torn between goodbye and escape, then forced herself to keep walking. She told herself Eleanor wouldn't care, that Sam would understand, that Diablo would never know she had left. The air outside was cool, the kind of morning that carried the promise of renewal. But for Claire, it felt like defeat. She crossed the yard, keeping her head low, hoping no one noticed. The whistle of an approaching train carried faintly through the distance, and she thought of Vermont, of maple leaves and mountains, and a childhood that no longer fit. Going back wouldn't heal her, but at least it wouldn't break her further. Running away? The voice stopped her cold. Sam leaned against the barn door, his hat tilted low, arms crossed. His eyes held no judgment, only weary resignation. "I thought maybe you'd try." Claire tightened her grip on the suitcase. "I can't stay. Not after what happened." He stepped forward, his boots crunching the gravel. "So you'll let him win? You'll let Blackwood turn you into another story he tells, about the foolish girl who thought she could tame a devil?" Her throat tightened. "You didn't see his eyes, Sam. He looked at me like I betrayed him. I can't face that again." Sam's voice softened. "What you saw wasn't betrayal. It was fear. Same as yours. You think you're the only one who fell that day? He fell too. And if you leave now, you'll prove Blackwood right. That no one will stand with him when it matters." Claire wanted to argue, but the whistle of the train carried closer, the sound tugging at her like a lifeline. She turned away, suitcase heavy in her hand. Then came the cry. It split the morning air, sharp and panicked. Diablo's scream. Claire froze, the sound dragging her heart into her throat. Workers shouted in the distance, their voices frantic. She dropped the suitcase and ran. The storm from days earlier had weakened the fences, and overnight rain had loosened the ground. Diablo had pressed against the rotted boards until they gave way, and now he was free, but not in triumph. His leg was caught in a tangle of broken planks, the sharp wood biting into flesh. He thrashed wildly, terror and pain fueling him, each movement pulling him closer to breaking bone. "Hold him!" the workers yelled, but none dared get too close. Diablo lashed out, his hooves slicing the air. Claire didn't think. She sprinted forward, mud splashing, her lungs burning. "No!" she screamed. "Stop! You'll make it worse!" The men looked at her like she was mad, but they hesitated, and that was enough. Claire dropped to her knees near the Mustang, her hands shaking as she reached for the tangled wood. Diablo's eyes rolled white, his breath ragged, nostrils flaring. He struck dangerously close, but she didn't retreat. "It's me," she whispered, voice breaking. "It's me. Please, let me help." For a moment, the world shrank to nothing but the sound of his breath and the pounding of her heart. Then, miraculously, his thrashing slowed. His sides still heaved, but his legs stilled just enough for her to work the boards free. She tugged, splinters biting into her palms, mud soaking her clothes. With one final wrench, the wood gave way. Diablo staggered free, stumbling, then righted himself, his body trembling with exhaustion. He stood over her, towering, chest heaving, eyes fixed on hers. Claire froze. Mud streaked across her face, waiting for him to bolt. But he didn't. He lowered his head, breath hot against her cheek, just as he had once before. This time, there was no steel between them, no barrier. Tears blurred her vision. She raised a trembling hand and slowly let her fingers brush his muzzle. Warmth surged through her, fragile and fleeting but real. Diablo shuddered, but didn't pull away. The men stared, silent, as if witnessing something they couldn't name. Sam stepped forward, awe in his eyes. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. Claire pressed her forehead lightly against the Mustang's damp coat. Her voice cracked. "I wasn't leaving. Not anymore." And in that instant, she knew she meant it. The train could come and go. Her place was here, standing beside the creature who mirrored her pain and her strength. That night, back in her room, she opened the journal and wrote with steady hands. "I tried to leave, but he called me back. Maybe we're both still here because we're meant to be." The suitcase remained at the foot of her bed, half packed, a silent witness to the choice she hadn't made. And for the first time, it didn't feel like an escape. It felt like a test she had finally passed. The rains returned without mercy. Days of relentless heat broke into a sky split open by thunder, and the heavens poured over the plains as though trying to wash them clean. Water carved rivulets through the dirt roads, turned pastures into swamps, and pressed the cattle into higher ground. The Blackwood Ranch, sprawling and proud, suddenly looked small against the force of nature. Claire stood in the barn doorway, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her clothes soaked through. She clutched her father's journal beneath her shirt to keep it dry, though its pages were already curling from the damp. Lightning flashed, throwing the fields into harsh relief, the fences sagging, the rivers swollen beyond their banks. Then she heard it. The cry. Not the panicked lowing of cattle or the shouts of men, but a scream deeper, sharper. Diablos. The sound cut through the storm, twisting her stomach. She ran without thinking, splashing through mud that clung like chains, the rain blinding her eyes. Sam's voice called after her, but the storm devoured it. At the far edge of the property, where the creek had swelled into a raging torrent, she found him. Diablo had fought his way too close to the water. His strength turned against him. A section of the fence had collapsed, and in his desperation he had stumbled into the mire. Now he thrashed chest deep in water, the current pulling at his legs, his eyes rolling white with terror. "Diablo," Claire's voice broke. She waded forward, the current nearly sweeping her off her feet. Cold water surged around her waist, dragging, biting. She clawed her way to the horse, mud sucking at her boots, her arms shaking from the effort. The Mustang screamed, flinging his head, spraying foam and rain. His hooves struck dangerously close, the power of his panic threatening to crush her. But Claire didn't retreat. She pressed her palms to his soaked neck, her voice a desperate prayer. "It's me. I'm here. Please, trust me." For a heartbeat, nothing changed. He surged against the current, nearly dragging her under. Then slowly the wildness in his eyes shifted. He recognized her. His thrashing eased, his body trembling but no longer fighting her. Claire slid her arm around his neck, clinging as the current threatened to pull them both away. With her free hand, she grabbed at the rope snagged in the wreckage of the fence, pulling with everything she had. Sam appeared suddenly through the rain, his boots sinking deep in the mud. Without a word, he grabbed the rope, muscles straining as he braced himself against the post. "Pull!" Claire shouted, her voice hoarse. Together they heaved, the storm roaring around them, the creek frothing with fury. Diablo lunged, his hooves finding purchase on firmer ground. Inch by inch, they dragged him free, until at last he stumbled onto solid earth, collapsing onto his side with a shudder that shook the ground. Claire fell beside him, chest heaving, her body spent. Rain poured over them, but she barely felt it. She laid her hand on his muzzle, her tears mixing with the storm. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're safe now." Diablo's eyes closed, his breath shuddering, his flank rising and falling in exhausted rhythm. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He let her hand rest there, let her presence steady him. In the chaos of the flood, they had found a fragile island of trust. Sam crouched beside them, his voice rough. "You could have died out there." Claire shook her head. "I couldn't let him drown. Not alone. Not like my father." Sam's gaze softened, and for once he didn't argue. He only looked at her, at the horse lying against the mud, and nodded. Then maybe he isn't the only one who needed saving. By dawn, the storm had broken, leaving the ranch waterlogged and battered. Workers moved like ghosts through the wreckage, repairing what they could. But in the quiet aftermath, one image lingered above all others. A girl and a Mustang, collapsed together in the mud, bound not by fear, but by survival. Back in her room, Claire opened her journal with hands still trembling. She wrote slowly, carefully, the ink blotting on damp paper. The flood tried to take him. I chose to stay, and for the first time he chose to stay with me. She closed the book, her body aching, but her heart strangely whole. Beyond her window, the fields steamed in the new light, and somewhere in the distance, Diablo lifted his head toward the sun, alive and unbroken. The flood left the land scarred but alive. Streams cut through pastures, fences sagged, and mud swallowed boots with each step. Yet in the days that followed, a new current ran beneath the chaos. Whispers of what Claire had done. Workers spoke in low voices of the girl who had waded into the torrent and pulled Diablo back from death. Some shook their heads, muttering that it had been foolish luck. Others, quieter still, admitted they'd never seen the wild horse so still under a human's touch. Henry heard the rumors, too. His pride bristled like a wound rubbed raw. He called the hands together one morning, his voice slicing through the yard. "Enough of your chatter. A flood doesn't change the nature of a beast. Diablo remains unbroken, and I'll prove it before every eye in this county." He set the date. Another gathering, larger than before. He would parade Diablo before them, offer the wager once more, and if no one dared, he would force the girl to climb on again. Claire's blood ran cold at the announcement, but she said nothing. She knew this was no longer just about Henry's pride or his money. It was about freedom. Hers and Diablo's. Sam found her later by the corral, where Diablo grazed in the damp grass, the mud drying to a crust on his coat. "You don't have to do this," Sam said, his voice low, urgent. "Blackwood's game will never be yours to win." Claire kept her gaze on the horse. "It's not about winning. It's about showing them he's not what they think he is, that he's more than a bet." Sam's hand tightened on the fence rail. "If you fall again—" "I won't," Claire interrupted, though fear coiled in her stomach. "Not this time." When the day came, the ranch swelled with people. Reporters with cameras, ranchers from neighboring counties, even rodeo men drawn by the challenge. The air buzzed with wagers, laughter, anticipation. Henry basked in it, shaking hands, boasting loudly of the $1 million prize. Claire stood apart, her hands damp, her heart pounding. She wore no fancy gear, no polished boots, only her father's worn leather gloves. The journal rested inside her pocket, its weight against her heart like a promise. Diablo was brought into the arena, his coat gleaming in the sun, his mane wild. He pawed the ground, snorted, eyes flashing. Yet there was something different now. The rage that had once consumed him was tempered by recognition. His gaze found Claire in the crowd, and for a moment the noise around her faded. Henry raised his hand for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, here she is, the foolish girl who believes kindness can conquer the devil." Laughter erupted, but Claire stepped forward anyway, her legs steady despite the tremor inside. She entered the ring slowly, deliberately. The workers stepped back, uneasy, as she crossed the dirt toward the Mustang. The crowd hushed, waiting for the inevitable disaster. Claire spoke softly, words meant only for him. "You know me. I'm not here to break you. I'm here to stand with you." Diablo snorted, ears flicking, but he didn't rear. He shifted, muscles taut, yet he stayed. Claire lifted her hand, letting him breathe her in, the way he had in the flood. Then, in one fluid motion, she placed her foot against his side and swung onto his back. The crowd gasped. For an instant, time stilled. She sat astride him, her body trembling, the heat of his muscles beneath her. Diablo stiffened, his head tossing, but he did not explode. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper in his ear. "It's just us. No cages, no bets. Just us." Then he moved. not in the violent buck of a trapped beast, but in a powerful surge forward. His hooves struck the ground with thunder, carrying her across the ring. The wind tore at her hair, the world blurring at the edges. She clung, not with force but with balance, letting his rhythm guide her. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some shouting disbelief. Henry's face drained of color, his jaw tight with rage. But Claire didn't see them. She saw only the horizon ahead, the sunlight flashing on Diablo's mane. The freedom in each stride. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, as if to prove himself, Diablo slowed, circling the ring once before stopping near the gate. He stood tall, chest heaving, but calm. Claire slid from his back, her knees weak, tears streaking her dust-stained face. The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, the applause began. Not from Henry or his polished guests, but from the ranch hands, the ones who had watched quietly from the sidelines. Their clapping grew louder, joined by whistles and cheers, until even the skeptics couldn't deny what they had seen. Henry's voice cut through, sharp and furious. "This means nothing. A trick of timing, nothing more." But the people weren't listening. Cameras flashed, voices rose, and Claire stood beside Diablo, her hand resting lightly on his neck. She whispered, so only he could hear. "We did the impossible." And for the first time, she felt not like a girl defying her fear, but like someone who had given freedom a voice. The ranch was never the same after that day. Whispers of the impossible ride spread faster than wildfire across dry plains, carried from one dusty town to the next. The workers walked with their heads a little higher, as if something inside them had shifted too. But the one who changed least of all was Henry Blackwood. He stormed through the house that night, his anger rattling the windows as much as the wind outside. He cursed the crowd, the cameras, the way his wager had turned into a spectacle that made him the fool instead of the victor. Yet beneath the rage was something quieter, something he could never admit. Fear. Fear that the walls of pride he had built so carefully were beginning to crack. Claire didn't seek him out. She had nothing left to prove to him. She spent her days by Diablo's side, grooming his coat, walking him through the pastures, her voice a steady song that softened the edges of his mistrust. She no longer flinched at his sudden movements. He no longer pulled away when her hand brushed his muzzle. Each day, their rhythm grew stronger, like a melody that had always existed, but was only now being played aloud. Eleanor came to her one evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, turning the sky 1,000 shades of fire. She leaned on the fence, her emerald eyes reflecting the fading light. "You've done what none of us could," she said quietly. "And you've shown me something I didn't want to see." Claire looked at her, waiting. "That freedom isn't something my father can give or take. It's something we claim for ourselves." Eleanor's voice trembled, but her jaw was set. "When I leave this ranch, it'll be on my own terms. And maybe you've given me the courage to finally do it." Claire reached across the fence, their fingers brushing. No words were needed. In that small gesture, they shared something rare. A bond between two girls who had carried too much silence for too long. The days stretched into weeks. Diablo grew stronger, his wounds from the flood healed, his spirit intact. Yet Claire began to sense something she couldn't ignore. Restlessness. Each morning when she led him to the pasture, his gaze drifted to the horizon, to the wild plains beyond the ranch. His ears flicked toward the open land. his body leaning forward as though listening to a call she could never silence. Sam noticed it too. One afternoon, he leaned against the corral, his hat shading his eyes. "He's not meant to live behind fences, Claire. You know that." Her throat tightened. She did know. Every time she pressed her hand against his coat, she felt the wildness beneath the surface, caged but unbroken. To keep him here, no matter how gentle her care, would be another kind of prison. That night she sat at her desk with the journal open. The lamp flickered, casting shadows across her father's handwriting. She added her own beneath his final entry. The measure of trust isn't in keeping him close. It's in letting him go and believing he'll remember. The decision tore at her, but it was clear. On the last morning, she led Diablo to the far edge of the property where the fence sagged against the hills. The sun rose behind them, painting the land gold. Eleanor stood a few paces back, her arms folded tight as if holding herself together. Sam was there too, silent, his eyes soft with understanding. Even Henry appeared, though he said nothing, his face unreadable as stone. Claire slipped the halter from Diablo's head. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. "But if you choose to stay, I'll be here. And if you choose to go—" Her breath caught. "Then go free." For a moment, the Mustang lingered. His ears twitched, his eyes locked on hers. He took one step forward, brushing his muzzle against her shoulder, breath hot and familiar. Then he turned, muscles rippling, and bolted. The sight stole her breath. He thundered across the open plain, mane streaming, hooves striking the earth in a rhythm older than fences, older than fear. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them. Her chest ached with loss, but also with something brighter. Pride. Diablo wasn't hers to keep. He never had been. But he had trusted her long enough to find freedom again. Eleanor slipped her arm around Claire's shoulders, her voice hushed. "You did it. Not just the impossible ride. You gave him back to himself." Claire leaned into her, the journal heavy in her hand. She thought of her father, of the words he had left behind, of the way his spirit lived not in grief, but in every choice she made to stand with kindness. That evening, she walked to the ridge alone. The horizon stretched endless, painted in the orange glow of sunset. Somewhere out there, a black Mustang ran wild again. The sound of his hooves seemed to echo through the earth, carrying into her bones. Claire opened the journal one last time and wrote, "He is free, and so am I." She closed the book, pressed it to her chest, and let the wind take the silence. For the first time in years, it wasn't empty. It was full. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. It means you were here, and you felt something too. Don't forget to subscribe, because every week we share more true-to-life stories of people and horses, tales of trust, loss, and unexpected hope. Stay with us. The next story may be the one your heart needs most.